La Mujer Apache, de 7 pies Juró que Nadie Podía Domarla hasta que Llegó ale. By the time she was a teenager, she had already reached a height that made people stop and stare. Some were amazed, while others whispered behind her back. But Isabella didn't care much about what people thought. She had learned early that life would not wait for her to fit in, and she would have to rely on her own strength to move forward. The small town she lived in was surrounded by wide deserts and rugged hills. The kind of place where people knew each other's business, and rumors traveled faster than the wind. Isabella often walked through the town streets, tall and commanding, with a presence that made everyone take notice. Some children would follow her just to see how she moved, how she carried herself with such quiet confidence. Adults often shook their heads, unsure whether to admire her or fear her. But to Isabella, these streets were just a place to pass through. She had a world far bigger in her mind and spirit than the town could ever contain. Growing up was not easy for her. Her height made ordinary things, like finding clothes or fitting into small spaces, a constant challenge. But the real challenge was the way people treated her. Some laughed, some stared, some tried to challenge her just to see if her reputation was true. And from a young age, she learned to meet each challenge with her own courage. Her mother had told her once, "No one can make you smaller, Isabella, except yourself." Those words became her silent armor. Even as a child, she had a fierce independence. She liked to climb hills alone, explore the edges of the desert, and practice running and jumping like a wild animal. She loved the feeling of freedom, the wind against her face, the sound of her own footsteps on the hard earth. It was in these moments that she felt truly herself, untamed and unstoppable. People called her the Apache woman because of the way she carried herself, strong and unyielding like the warriors of old. The nickname stuck, and while others whispered it as a kind of warning, she wore it like a badge of honor. Isabella's home life was simple but strict. Her father had passed away when she was very young, and her mother worked long hours to provide for the family. Isabella learned quickly that she could not rely on others to solve her problems. She learned to cook, to clean, to care for the small garden behind their home, and to handle chores that many teenagers her age would avoid. She found pride in her abilities. She was capable, strong, and determined to live life on her own terms. At school, things were not always easy. Children sometimes teased her, calling her giant or monster, not understanding that her size was only part of who she was. But Isabella refused to let their words hurt her. She learned to respond with confidence or simply walk away. Teachers often admired her intelligence and discipline, though they worried about her social life. But for Isabella, friendship was complicated. Many people admired her from afar but could not match her energy, her intensity, or her fierce desire for freedom. She liked solitude because in solitude she could think, dream, and move without anyone telling her what to do. Her life became a series of routines, shaped by independence and survival. She spent her mornings helping her mother with chores, her afternoons exploring the hills, and her evenings reading or practicing skills she admired in others, skills that could make her stronger and more self-reliant. Horses fascinated her. There was something in the way they moved, powerful, graceful, untamed, that reminded her of herself. She would often sneak away to the stables of neighbors, quietly watching how the horses behaved, learning to read their eyes and movements. By the time she was 15, she could handle horses that others struggled with, earning a reputation as someone who could train the untrainable. Despite her independence, there was a quiet loneliness that settled in her heart. She had grown so used to being different that she didn't expect anyone to truly understand her. She observed families, couples, and friends in the town, and sometimes felt a longing she couldn't name. But she quickly pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that no one could ever control her or confine her spirit. That was her law, and she followed it strictly. People in the town would often tell stories about her courage. They spoke of how she could lift objects twice her size, climb hills that seemed impossible, and even calm wild horses that others had given up on. Her reputation spread beyond the town, whispered in nearby villages and even in the surrounding deserts. Some spoke of her height with awe, some with fear, but all agreed that she was untouchable. Isabella took pride in her abilities, but she was careful not to let it turn into arrogance. She knew that strength alone did not define a person. It was how you used it, how you lived with it, that mattered. Her favorite times were the early mornings, when the town was quiet and the world seemed new. She would walk to the hills, her long legs carrying her easily over rocky terrain. The desert stretched endlessly, golden in the soft light of dawn, and she felt that the world belonged to her in those moments. No one could tell her what to do. No one could reach the thoughts in her mind or the fire in her heart. She was her own master. And yet, even in those moments of freedom, there was a part of her that wondered what it would be like to meet someone who could match her spirit, not to control her, but to walk beside her as an equal. She had heard stories of legendary friendships and partnerships, of people who understood one another without trying to dominate. She dismissed the thought quickly, reminding herself that she had survived this long by relying only on herself. But the seed of curiosity was planted. Isabella's reputation was not built on fear alone. It was built on skill, courage, and the unmistakable aura of someone who refused to bend. People came to her for advice on handling difficult horses or for guidance in the desert, but few dared to get close to her personally. She observed others, learning from their mistakes, understanding human nature, and keeping her distance when necessary. She was a master of her own life, and no one had yet challenged her in a way that mattered. By the time she reached her early 20s, Isabella had become a legend in her own right. Travelers would stop in the town just to catch a glimpse of the woman who towered over everyone, and yet moved with the grace of someone completely in control of herself. She was unyielding, untouchable, and untamed, a true Apache spirit in the modern world. But inside, beyond the physical presence and the stories, she remained human. She had dreams, fears, and a secret longing for connection that she would not yet admit, even to herself. And so, Isabella continued her life as she always had, strong, independent, and fierce. She ruled her world, the hills, and the horses with confidence and skill. She kept her heart guarded, her spirit untamed, and her reputation intact. But somewhere in the quiet corners of her mind, a small thought lingered. One day, maybe, someone might come along who would not try to tame her, but instead understand the untamable fire that burned within her. For now, though, she walked through the desert mornings alone, a giant among ordinary people, a legend growing with every step, and a heart quietly waiting for the day that someone might see her as more than just a towering figure, a woman of depth, courage, and an untamed spirit. Life for Isabella continued with the rhythm she had created for herself. Her mornings began with tending to her small garden, feeding the chickens, and checking on the few horses she owned. Her afternoons were spent exploring the hills and valleys surrounding the town, always testing her strength and endurance, always seeking challenges that no one else could face. She loved the open spaces, the way the desert stretched endlessly beneath the bright sun, and the quiet sound of the wind moving through the rocks and grass. To her, these moments were freedom, freedom that no one could take away. Horses fascinated her more than anything else. Their strength, speed, and independence mirrored her own life. She spent hours at the stables, observing how they moved, how they reacted to commands, and how they expressed their moods with subtle shifts in posture and gaze. Many horses had been labeled untamable, but Isabella found a way to connect with them. She didn't try to dominate them. She didn't yell or force them to obey. Instead, she approached them with patience, respect, and quiet confidence. Slowly, the horses began to trust her, and in return, she gained their loyalty and cooperation. It was a delicate balance, one that required both courage and understanding. Her talent with horses became well known throughout the region. People from nearby towns would bring animals to her, hoping she could train them or calm their wild energy. Most of the time, she succeeded where others failed. Even seasoned trainers were surprised at how naturally she worked with the horses, her movements precise, her voice calm, and her presence commanding. Word of her skills spread quickly, and soon travelers spoke of the Apache woman who tamed the untamable, a title that amused her secretly but also filled her with quiet pride. Despite her growing reputation, Isabella remained wary of people. She had learned over the years that many were drawn to her for the wrong reasons: curiosity, fear, or fascination with her height and strength. Some men tried to charm her, some sought to challenge her, and some simply wanted to be near someone extraordinary. But she had little patience for superficial attention. She valued genuine connection, respect, and understanding, none of which she found easily. So she maintained her distance, politely refusing advances and keeping her heart guarded. Her life, however, was not entirely solitary. She had a few friends who understood her better than anyone else, mostly women, and a couple of older men who respected her independence. They would visit her small home, share meals, and exchange stories about the town and the world beyond. But even these friendships were measured. Isabella never let anyone get too close, not because she didn't care, but because she had learned that freedom and trust were rare commodities, ones she was unwilling to give lightly. One day, while she was working with a particularly stubborn stallion, she noticed a stranger in the distance. He was walking slowly toward the stable, carrying a simple bag over his shoulder and moving with calm confidence. Isabella observed him silently. He was not the kind of person who looked impressed or intimidated by her presence. Instead, he seemed focused, deliberate, and patient. He introduced himself as Alejandro, a traveling horse trainer who had heard stories of her skill and had come to learn from her methods. Isabella's first instinct was skepticism. Many had come before him, seeking to challenge her or test her patience. But Alejandro did not behave in that way. He asked questions about her techniques, listened attentively, and showed genuine interest in the horses rather than in her. For the first time in a long while, Isabella felt curiosity rather than irritation. She allowed him to observe as she worked with the stallion, noting how carefully he studied her movements, how respectfully he approached the animals. Over the next few days, Alejandro stayed in town, helping other horse owners and occasionally visiting Isabella's stable. He never overstepped boundaries. He never tried to impress her with words or physical strength. Instead, he showed consistency, patience, and quiet confidence. The stallion, which had been a challenge for her, began to respond more quickly with Alejandro's calm presence nearby. Isabella noticed that the horse seemed more relaxed, more willing to trust, and she realized that Alejandro's presence was more than just respectful, it was stabilizing. As the days passed, Isabella found herself talking to Alejandro more often. They discussed techniques, shared stories of their past experiences, and sometimes spoke about dreams for the future. Alejandro never tried to lead the conversation into personal territory too quickly. He respected her space, and in doing so, he earned her attention. Isabella was used to people trying to dominate or control situations, but Alejandro's approach was different. He didn't try to dominate, and that difference began to intrigue her. Their relationship was not romantic at first. It was built on shared interests and mutual respect. Alejandro appreciated Isabella's strength, skill, and independence, but he never let admiration turn into flattery. He treated her as an equal, which was a rare experience for someone like Isabella, who had been underestimated or feared her entire life. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself began to soften. not because he was trying to break them down, but because he showed her that trust could be earned without pressure or manipulation. Life in the town continued, with its mix of quiet routines and occasional challenges. Horses still needed training, chores still needed to be done, and the desert still called to her for long walks and explorations. But now, Alejandro was part of her days. He helped with difficult tasks, offered advice when asked, and shared in moments of triumph when a horse that had resisted training for months finally responded. Their cooperation was seamless, as if the two of them understood each other without needing constant explanation. One afternoon, a particularly difficult situation arose. A wild horse had wandered into a neighboring field, frightened and aggressive. The townspeople were worried and unsure how to handle it. Isabella quickly mounted her own horse and rode to the field, with Alejandro following. Working together, they approached the wild horse slowly and calmly. Isabella's experience with the animals guided their movements, while Alejandro's patience and steady demeanor helped calm the horse's anxiety. Within hours, the horse was returned safely, and the neighbors watched in awe at their teamwork. This incident marked a turning point for Isabella. She realized that Alejandro's presence was not a threat to her independence. Instead, he complemented her strength, offering support where it was needed and never interfering where it was not. She began to notice other small things: how he listened without judgment, how he anticipated her needs without overstepping, and how he respected her decisions even when he disagreed. It was a partnership unlike any she had experienced before, and it challenged her understanding of trust and cooperation. Despite her growing respect and curiosity for Alejandro, Isabella remained cautious. She was aware of her own history, of the mistakes others had made when trying to get too close to her. She knew that strength alone could not protect her from emotional vulnerability. But she also noticed that Alejandro's presence made life feel lighter. The chores became easier, the days more interesting, and the challenges more manageable. Slowly, she allowed herself to enjoy his company, without needing to define what it meant or where it might lead. At night, after a long day of work with the horses, Isabella would sometimes sit on the hill overlooking the town, thinking about the events of the day. The desert stretched endlessly before her, and she felt the familiar sense of freedom and independence. Yet now there was a small but undeniable change. The world felt a little less lonely, and the thought of connection, long suppressed, began to feel possible. She did not know what the future would hold, but she sensed that her life was beginning to shift in ways she could not yet predict. In the quiet moments, she reflected on her own journey, the struggles, the victories, and the solitude that had shaped her. Alejandro had entered her life like a quiet wind, unobtrusive yet noticeable, bringing with him the possibility of partnership without dominance, understanding without control. For someone who had always relied on herself, this was a new and unsettling experience. But for the first time, it felt right. By the end of the season, Isabella and Alejandro had formed a bond based on mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences. They continued to work together, train horses, and explore the hills and deserts. But beyond the practical collaboration, a quiet connection was growing, a connection built on recognition of each other's strength and independence, and an unspoken understanding that neither would try to change the other. For Isabella, it was a revelation. She had always believed that no one could ever match her spirit, but Alejandro had come close, not by challenging her, but by walking alongside her. And so, life moved forward, still filled with challenges, still demanding strength and courage, but now enriched with the presence of someone who understood, respected, and complimented her. Isabella's independence remained intact, but a new dimension of life had begun to take shape, one in which trust, partnership, and quiet companionship could exist alongside her untamed spirit. The town continued to watch her with awe and admiration, unaware that the most profound changes were not in the public achievements or legendary deeds, but in the subtle, almost invisible shifts of the heart. The days grew longer as summer settled over the desert town, and with them came a rhythm that Isabella had come to expect. She rose with the sun, tended to her chores, and spent her afternoons with the horses, always moving, always learning, always testing the limits of her strength and patience. But this summer was different from all the others. Alejandro had become a steady presence in her life, and with him came a sense of curiosity and tension she had never known before. He was not like anyone she had ever met, and for that reason, he both intrigued and unsettled her. Their days together began early, often with quiet observation. Alejandro never rushed her or tried to change the way she approached her work. He followed her lead, sometimes offering gentle suggestions, but always respecting her decisions. The horses, accustomed to her touch, responded to him in ways that surprised her. It was not that he had more skill. Isabella was still the master, but his calm presence seemed to influence the animals, allowing them to trust her more quickly. She could not deny that there was something remarkable in this balance. One afternoon, Isabella decided to challenge herself with a horse she had avoided for months. The stallion, black as night with eyes sharp and wary, had resisted all attempts at training. Most people would have given up, labeling him dangerous or untrainable, but Isabella saw in him a reflection of her own spirit, untamed, proud, and unwilling to submit. Alejandro stood nearby, watching silently as she approached. He did not interfere. He did not offer advice. He simply observed, his presence calm and unassuming, as if he knew the importance of letting her face the challenge on her own terms. The first few minutes were tense. The stallion snorted and stomped, testing her patience, trying to intimidate her. Isabella met his gaze steadily, her body poised, her voice firm yet soothing. Alejandro quietly handed her a lead rope when she requested it, saying nothing more. She felt the weight of the moment, not just the physical challenge, but the unspoken understanding that Alejandro trusted her to take control. That trust was rare, almost unheard of, and it stirred a strange feeling within her. For the first time, she realized that partnership did not mean submission, it meant support. Hours passed as she worked with the stallion. Sweat poured down her face, and her arms ached from the exertion, but she refused to give up. Alejandro stayed by her side, offering quiet encouragement only when she asked. There were moments when the stallion seemed ready to bolt, moments when it seemed impossible to maintain control, yet Isabella pressed on. She felt a mixture of fear, excitement, and exhilaration that reminded her why she loved challenges. And through it all, Alejandro remained steady, a silent witness to her strength and determination. By the evening, the stallion had begun to respond. It was not complete obedience, but it was progress, a breakthrough that few believed possible. Isabella exhaled, a mix of relief and pride washing over her. Alejandro smiled, a small but genuine expression that made her heart skip a beat. She had trained many horses before, but she had never felt the kind of connection she felt in that moment, not just with the animal, but with the person who had watched her succeed without trying to take control. Over the following weeks, their partnership deepened. They spent long hours together in the stables, exploring the surrounding hills and discussing techniques for horse training. Their conversations were often practical, focused on methods, strategies, and observations. But there were also moments of quiet personal exchange, subtle glimpses into each other's lives and values. Alejandro spoke of the towns and people he had encountered on his travels, of lessons he had learned from failures and successes alike. Isabella shared stories of her childhood, the challenges she had faced, and the pride she felt in her independence. Through these conversations, a subtle shift began to occur. Isabella, who had always guarded her heart fiercely, began to notice Alejandro in ways she could not fully explain. It was not simply attraction, though she could not deny the occasional warmth she felt when he smiled or spoke with genuine interest. It was something deeper, a recognition that he understood her in ways that others never had. He did not seek to dominate or control, nor did he try to impress her with words or feats. Instead, he walked beside her, matching her stride, matching her spirit, without trying to change who she was. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert in hues of gold and orange, they rode together along the hills. The wind rushed past their faces, carrying the scent of dry grass and wildflowers. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sound of hooves on the dusty ground and the occasional distant bird call. Alejandro glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light, and for a moment Isabella felt a connection that went beyond words. It was as if they were moving through the world together, not as master and observer, but as equals, each acknowledging the strength and resilience of the other. Despite these growing feelings, Isabella remained cautious. She had learned over the years that independence was fragile, that trust was hard-won and easily broken. She valued her freedom above all else, and feared that opening her heart could lead to vulnerability she was not ready to face. Yet, Alejandro's presence was different. He never pressured her, never demanded attention or affection. He simply existed as a steady force, patient and observant, allowing her to choose how close she wanted him to be. This approach both frustrated and intrigued her, forcing her to confront feelings she had long suppressed. Their bond was further tested one morning when a sudden storm swept through the desert. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and heavy winds threatened to overturn equipment and spook the horses. Isabella and Alejandro worked together to secure the animals, tying ropes, calming frightened horses, and moving supplies to safer locations. In the chaos, they had to communicate quickly, relying on unspoken signals and trust. Isabella realized that this was more than just a test of skill, it was a test of partnership. Alejandro did not try to take charge, but neither did he hesitate when action was needed. They moved as one, complementing each other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. After the storm passed, they sat together on a hilltop, drenched and exhausted, watching as the last rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds. For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings. She respected Alejandro, admired his patience, and felt a warmth in his presence that she could not ignore. She did not yet understand where this connection might lead, but she knew that her heart had shifted in ways she had never anticipated. Alejandro, sensing her unspoken thoughts, offered a small smile, one that spoke of understanding and quiet companionship. In the weeks that followed, their connection continued to grow, both through shared work and quiet personal moments. They laughed together over minor mishaps with the horses, shared stories of distant places, and occasionally walked the desert trails in companionable silence. Isabella began to notice small details. The way Alejandro adjusted his approach when a horse was nervous, the subtle care in his movements, the thoughtful consideration in his words. These observations, once trivial, now carried weight. She realized that he had earned her trust not by trying to impress her, but by respecting her strength and independence. Yet, even as their relationship deepened, Isabella maintained her boundaries. She valued her autonomy and feared losing herself in emotional attachment. She reminded herself that she had survived alone for so long, that her freedom was her most treasured possession. Alejandro never threatened that freedom. He never demanded more than she was willing to give. And in this delicate balance, Isabella began to understand that partnership did not mean surrender. It meant choosing to allow someone to walk beside her, to share experiences without diminishing her independence. The turning point came one evening when they discovered a foal trapped near a small creek. The young horse was frightened, struggling to free itself from a fallen branch. Isabella acted quickly, instructing Alejandro to stay calm and move carefully. Together they freed the foal, soothing it with gentle words and steady hands. The experience was intense, requiring trust, coordination, and courage. When the foal finally ran free, Isabella looked at Alejandro, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and admiration. He had not only assisted her, but had complimented her efforts in a way that no one else could. By the end of part 3, Isabella began to realize that Alejandro was not an intruder in her life, but a partner who could match her spirit. She understood that being untamable did not mean rejecting connection, but choosing carefully whom to let in. Alejandro's patience, respect, and quiet strength had earned a place in her life, not as someone who changed her, but as someone who enhanced her own power and independence. And for the first time in many years, Isabella began to imagine that a life shared with another could be possible, even for someone as fiercely independent as she was. The desert had a way of testing both patience and courage, and for Isabella, it had become a place where lessons were learned not just from the land, but from the people who shared it. Over the weeks, she and Alejandro had grown closer, not in a rush or in words, but in silent understanding, in shared moments that neither could fully explain. Their connection was like the desert itself, vast, sometimes quiet, occasionally harsh, but always alive with energy. One morning, Isabella arrived at the stables to find Alejandro already tending to the horses. He had been observing a new foal that had been brought to town by a neighboring farmer, a spirited young horse with a stubborn streak. Alejandro greeted her with his usual calm smile, and together they approached the animal. Isabella noticed how naturally he moved around the horse, not forcing it, not startling it, simply observing and responding with subtle gestures. She could not help but admire him, not for what he said, but for the way he worked. The day became a test of teamwork. The foal was nervous and untrusting, bolting at the slightest noise and resisting every attempt to calm it. Isabella and Alejandro had to coordinate their efforts carefully. She would speak softly to the horse while Alejandro approached from the side, mirroring her movements and creating a sense of balance. Neither spoke unnecessarily, their communication mostly in glances and gestures. The foal gradually began to relax, its breathing steadier, its movements calmer. Isabella felt a thrill of pride, but also a quiet recognition of something deeper. She had never worked so seamlessly with another person before. During a short break, they walked to the edge of the desert hills, letting the horses graze nearby. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the sand and rocks. Alejandro looked at Isabella with a thoughtful expression. "You have a way of seeing them," he said quietly, "not just the horses but the people too. You notice things most others miss." Isabella shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've had to," she replied. "If you want to survive here, you have to notice everything. Every movement, every sound, every moment matters." He nodded, respecting her words. "I can see that, and it's remarkable the way you carry yourself, the way you lead without forcing anything. Most people could never do that." There was a silence after his comment, but it was not awkward. It was full, heavy with understanding. For the first time, Isabella felt that someone saw her truly, not just her height, her skill, or her reputation, but her thoughtfulness, her courage, and her independence. Alejandro did not try to impress her. He did not compliment her to flatter her, and he did not expect anything in return. That authenticity was rare, and it made her heart respond in ways she had never anticipated. In the weeks that followed, their bond strengthened through daily challenges and small victories. They trained horses together, often laughing at minor mishaps, sharing quiet moments of joy when an animal finally responded to their efforts. Isabella began to appreciate Alejandro's approach, not commanding, not forceful, but steady, patient, and understanding. He had a way of bringing out the best in both her and the horses, creating harmony without tension. One evening, As the sky turned pink and gold with the setting sun, Alejandro suggested a ride beyond the familiar trails. Isabella hesitated for a moment. She had always explored alone, but something in his calm expression encouraged her to accept. Together they rode into the hills, the horses' hooves kicking up dust that glowed in the fading light. The world felt expansive, infinite, and strangely safe in his presence. They reached a high ridge overlooking the desert valley below. The sight took her breath away. The sun sinking into the horizon, the desert stretching endlessly, and the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and dry earth. Alejandro dismounted and extended a hand to help her down. She accepted, and for a moment they stood side by side, looking out at the vast landscape. "You trust me," Alejandro said softly. Isabella looked at him, her eyes reflecting both surprise and realization. "I do," she admitted. It was not just about riding together or working with the horses. It was deeper than that. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to trust someone fully, not blindly, but with understanding and awareness. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "And I respect that. I would never want to change who you are. I only want to walk beside you, not ahead or behind." Her heart swelled with emotions she had kept buried for years. Admiration, relief, curiosity, and something she could only describe as a quiet joy. Alejandro did not try to conquer her spirit, he did not try to control her choices, and he did not demand her attention. He simply existed as a partner, patient and present, and that was a rare gift. Over the next few days, they faced new challenges together. A neighbor's herd had broken through a fence, and Isabella and Alejandro rode together to round up the animals. It was a complicated task, requiring skill, coordination, and calm under pressure. The townspeople watched from a distance, marveling at the seamless teamwork between the towering woman and the steady horse trainer. Horses were her domain, but Alejandro had earned his place beside her through quiet observation, patience, and action. Each evening they would return to the stables, exhausted but satisfied. Alejandro often helped her secure the horses, clean the stalls, and repair fences, but he never took over. He offered support, never interference, and that distinction mattered deeply to Isabella. She had always believed that partnership meant compromise of independence, but Alejandro had shown her that it could mean collaboration without loss, support without control. Their conversations became more personal, though still gentle and respectful. They spoke about childhood memories, the challenges they had faced, and the values that guided their lives. Alejandro shared stories of distant towns and people he had met, while Isabella spoke of her childhood, her mother, and the lessons she had learned from surviving on her own. These exchanges, though quiet and thoughtful, brought them closer than either had expected. One particularly quiet evening, a soft rain began to fall. The desert had not seen much water in months, and the sound of the drops hitting the earth and the roofs of the stables created a peaceful rhythm. Isabella and Alejandro sat together under a small shelter, watching the rain. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply existed in the quiet, sharing the experience without words. The storm outside mirrored a shift inside her heart, an acknowledgement that companionship, trust, and understanding could coexist with her independence. Isabella began to see that her idea of being untamable did not have to mean isolation. She could maintain her strength, her freedom, and her spirit, while allowing someone else into her life in a way that enhanced, rather than diminished, her sense of self. Alejandro did not try to change her. He only encouraged her to accept that partnership could be a source of strength, not a threat. Over time, they became inseparable in their work. Every horse that had been deemed untrainable became a challenge they faced together. Every obstacle in the desert was tackled side by side. Even in moments of disagreement, they listened, adjusted, and respected each other's judgment. Isabella realized that this was a new form of strength, emotional strength that came not from solitude, but from mutual respect and understanding. By the end of part 4, Isabella's perspective had shifted. She still valued her independence above all else, but she had come to recognize the power of partnership. Alejandro had shown her that one could be untamable and still allow connection, untamed yet trusting, fierce yet open. Their bond had grown from mutual respect into a subtle, unspoken intimacy, a deep understanding that neither would ever try to control the other. As the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the desert, Isabella looked at Alejandro with a quiet smile. For the first time in her life, she felt that being strong, independent, and untamable did not mean she had to face the world alone. Someone had arrived who could walk beside her, not to lead, not to tame, but to match her step for step, challenge for challenge, heart for heart. And that, she realized, was a rare and beautiful gift. The desert was calm that morning, a soft golden light stretching across the hills and valleys. Isabella rose early, as always, tending to her chores and checking on the horses. Alejandro had already been at the stables, moving quietly among the animals, speaking softly to each one as if he knew their thoughts. Over time, Isabella had grown to appreciate these quiet mornings. They were peaceful, productive, and gave her a sense of stability that she had never experienced alone. Today, however, the calm was interrupted. A young foal had wandered into a ravine near the edge of the desert hills. Its mother had followed, but the uneven terrain had frightened them both. By the time the neighbors discovered the situation, the foal was stuck, struggling against the rocks and loose soil, while the mother paced anxiously nearby. Panic spread through the small town, and several people came to watch, unsure how to help. Isabella and Alejandro, already aware of the danger, mounted their horses and rode to the scene. The sight of the foal tugged at Isabella's heart. She had faced difficult situations with animals before, but this was different. The ravine was steep, the ground unstable, and the foal frightened. One wrong move could injure both horse and human. Alejandro's calm presence reassured her, but she knew the responsibility rested on them. Together, they assessed the situation. "We'll need to be very careful," Isabella said. Her voice was steady, but her mind raced with calculations of angles, footing, and timing. Alejandro nodded, already positioning himself to assist. They worked in silence, moving slowly, speaking in soft tones to keep the animals calm. Isabella guided her horse carefully along the edge of the ravine, while Alejandro flanked the foal's side, ready to catch or steady it if needed. Every movement was deliberate, every decision crucial. The foal tried to leap, panicking at the slightest noise, and Isabella's heart leapt with it. She focused on her training, her instincts, and her understanding of animal behavior. Alejandro mirrored her movements, anticipating her next step, supporting her without taking over. The foal began to calm under their combined guidance, trusting the humans who had approached not with force but with care. It took nearly an hour of delicate work, but finally the foal was free, its legs steady beneath it, its breathing slowing. The mother nuzzled it gently, and the animals moved safely back to the flatter ground. Isabella and Alejandro breathed in unison, their relief unspoken but palpable. The townspeople who had watched from a distance erupted in quiet admiration, whispering about the teamwork, the courage, and the skill they had witnessed. After ensuring the animals were safe, Isabella and Alejandro returned to their horses, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Isabella's body ached from the tension and effort, but her heart was light. She looked at Alejandro, noticing for the first time just how much she relied on his calm presence, his understanding, and his support. She realized that this was not just about saving a foal, it was a moment that revealed the depth of their partnership. As they rode back toward the stables, the wind carrying the scent of the desert flowers, Alejandro spoke softly. "You handled that beautifully. You didn't just lead, you guided with understanding. Most people would have rushed or panicked." Isabella smiled faintly, her pride mingled with humility. I couldn't have done it without you. You were steady, careful. You made me feel like we could do this together. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting something deeper than admiration. We did it together. That's the important part. Alone, we would have struggled. Together, we succeed. For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to feel the fullness of the moment, not just the success, but the bond between them. She realized that Alejandro had not changed her, nor had he tried to. He had simply walked beside her, offering support and understanding while respecting her independence. And in that moment, she understood the true meaning of partnership. In the following days, life returned to its routines, but something had shifted. The bond between Isabella and Alejandro deepened, no longer just about work or horses, but about trust, respect, and quiet companionship. They continued to train horses, explore the desert, and face challenges together. But now, every shared experience carried a subtle awareness of connection, a recognition that neither of them would ever try to dominate or change the other. One evening, as the sun set in a brilliant display of gold and pink, they rode to a high ridge overlooking the valley. The air was cool, the wind soft, and the desert stretched endlessly before them. Alejandro dismounted and held out his hand to help Isabella down. She accepted, and together they stood side by side, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "You've changed things for me," Isabella said quietly. She wasn't sure exactly what she meant at first. Perhaps it was the trust, the partnership, or the subtle comfort of knowing someone truly understood her. "I didn't change you," Alejandro replied gently. "I just walked beside you. You've always been strong, brave, and untamable. I only wanted to be here when you needed someone." Her heart swelled with emotions she had never fully admitted to herself. She had always believed that being untamable meant facing the world alone. Now she understood that strength and independence did not exclude connection. They could exist together, strength with support, freedom with companionship. She realized that she could be fierce and free, yet allow someone to walk beside her without compromising who she was. Over the next weeks, the town noticed a subtle change in Isabella. She remained the tall, fearless figure who commanded respect and admiration, but there was a new softness in her presence. When Alejandro was nearby, she smiled more freely, laughed more easily, and moved with a sense of ease she had rarely allowed herself. The townspeople whispered about the bond between the Apache woman and the traveling horse trainer, but Isabella cared little for gossip. What mattered was the quiet understanding they shared, the unspoken trust that neither needed to explain to anyone else. Their partnership continued to grow, tested by new challenges and strengthened by daily routines. Horses that had been difficult or frightened responded to their combined efforts. Obstacles in the desert became adventures they faced together. Even in moments of disagreement, they respected each other's judgment, listened carefully, and adapted. Isabella realized that this balance was rare, a partnership that did not diminish her independence but enhanced it, a connection built on mutual respect and admiration. One day, as they rested after a long ride, Alejandro turned to her. "I never thought I would meet someone like you," he said softly. "Someone who is so strong, so independent, and yet so capable of trust and care. You've taught me as much as I've taught you." Isabella looked at him, feeling the truth of his words. "I've learned that trust doesn't mean weakness," she replied. "It means knowing who deserves it, and I trust you." There was a quiet pause between them, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to accept that partnership and independence were not opposites, they were complementary. Strength did not mean solitude, and trust did not mean surrender. Alejandro had shown her that. In the following months, their lives intertwined naturally. They trained horses, repaired stables, explored new trails, and shared quiet moments beneath the desert sky. The bond between them deepened into something neither could deny: mutual respect, admiration, and an unspoken, profound affection. The town continued to watch in awe as the Apache woman remained untamed, yet no longer alone. By the end of this chapter of their lives, Isabella realized something she had never believed possible. She could remain the untamable force she had always been, yet allow herself to trust, to share, and to connect. Alejandro had never tried to change her, dominate her, or confine her. He had only walked beside her, step for step, heart for heart, offering support, understanding, and companionship. And in that balance, she found a new kind of freedom, freedom that included someone she could rely on without losing herself. Standing once more on the ridge at sunset, looking over the desert that had shaped her, Isabella felt a quiet joy she had never known. She was still fierce, independent, and untamed. But now she was also understood, appreciated, and accompanied. The world seemed wider, the challenges more exciting, and life more meaningful. Alejandro was there, not to tame her, not to control her, but to share the journey, and that was a gift greater than any she had imagined. For Isabella, the legend of the Apache woman did not fade, it grew, enriched by love, partnership, and the knowledge that strength and vulnerability could coexist. She had faced life alone for so long, but she had discovered that being untamable did not mean isolation. It meant choosing wisely who walked beside her, and Alejandro had become the companion she never expected but could not imagine life without. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in brilliant colors, Isabella and Alejandro stood together, silent yet connected, ready to face whatever challenges the world might bring, untamed, independent, and stronger together than they had ever been alone.